Rabbi Robert Barr here, and once more I'm streaming this Shabbat service from my home. We are living in challenging and difficult times. And the Sabbath, this moment that we come together, is an opportunity for us to pause, to gain some perspective on where we've been, where we're going, to think about our values and that which is most essential in our lives. The days flow into one another without interruption. Time races on. The Sabbath is our means to divert time, a stepping off point, pausing with friends and loved ones to observe, then rejoice in the wonder-filled coincidence of living. There can be a sense of pleasure in every given breath, blessed with taste to savor and warmth to give and to receive, bestowed with gifts of sight and sound. We are obliged to cherish and revel in each smile, in every musical note. The Sabbath also awakens us to the silence between notes. It speaks of contemplation, the quiet delight of literature, of unhurried walks, of rare conversation. The Sabbath can be our interlude, our ritual pause in this lively current, our signal to step more lightly, to appreciate more profoundly, to dive more deeply into the questions that life is asking. Again, I'm Rabbi Robert Barr of Congregation Beth Adam, our bricks and mortar congregation, and our Jewish community, our streaming congregation. We've been streaming for 10 years. It has allowed us to reach people around the world, to remain in contact with students who grew up at Congregation Beth Adam, or members who have left the city of Cincinnati, or people who've encountered us and wanted to be a part of this community. And given the pandemic, it has become ever more important. In a time when we are physically distant, streaming our services online have been a way for us to remain in communication with one another, to remain literally in community. The internet, though, is a tool. The core of what we do at Congregation Beth Adam is the voice of Judaism, a bold, strong, dynamic voice, a voice that is informed by science, modernity, a voice that understands that while our ancestors spoke about who they were and what they understood, we need to do the same. We have the right and the responsibility to add our chapter to the Jewish history. We need to add our chapter and our voices and our words to the evolution of the Jewish process. We don't need to be constrained by the past. We need to embrace creativity and integrity and create a Judaism that is vibrant and of this moment. Now, perhaps you're watching our service on one of our two different Facebook pages or on our website, or perhaps on YouTube at this point. We're streaming in multiple platforms. Please, if you're leaving messages, be welcoming and inclusive. Let us know where you're participating from. We also recognize that many people aren't watching live at 6 o'clock, that you may be watching in our archives because your life doesn't allow you to pause at 6 o'clock Eastern time. That's great. The goal of our Jewish community is to create a place where you can come that is available to you when you're ready, when you're available, when you have the time. So I'm delighted you're here. I'm delighted we can share this time, this Shabbat together. And we continue our service with the lighting of the Shabbat candles. The candles of Shabbat stand before us, waiting to meet the flame, longing to share their warmth, ready to shed their light. Like those who came before us, like all people, we find comfort in fear and flame, endless swirl of fascination, mystery and awe. Like those who came before us, like all people, we are graced with the desire and the will to understand. So we continue our ancestors' search for answers, pushing away the darkness of ignorance. The flames they saw as magic and beyond comprehension become flames of hope and knowledge. But still we look with wonder, inspired by their beauty and their power. We embrace the flames of Shabbat. The flame, we embrace the light, our vessel of mystery and understanding. As we light our Shabbat candles, we celebrate our journey, our quest, our moments of peace. May the light of our people shine. May the light of the Shabbat cast its warmth in our homes. May these candles burn with respect for all who push beyond the bounds of ignorance, for all who seek justice, for all who build community. May these candles burn with memory of all who came before us. May we draw on the many ways our people have given voice to their ideas and values. May we add our own insight to their glow. Baruch ha'or ba'olam, blessed is the light within the world. Baruch ha'or ba'adam, blessed is the light within each person. Baruch ha'or ba'Shabbat, blessed is the light of the Sabbath. We are living in difficult and challenging times. We are dealing in America, certainly with the issue of systemic racism, as we watch and are struck by the murder of George Floyd. And we ask, how could that have happened? I invited a friend of mine, Rob Richardson, to have a conversation with me and with all of us about these issues. We are living at a profoundly difficult time in American history. And I asked a colleague and a friend to join us to talk about his perception of what is happening in America today as a function of most recently, the murder of George Floyd and the protests that are erupting about what has happened and the reaction. So I want to introduce Rob Richardson. Rob and I met when he was running for state treasurer. That was really when our paths intersected, and I learned a lot about you. You and I actually share something. We both had learning disabilities, and we both had to overcome them. That may have made us the people we are. We went in a little different path. You have an engineering degree and a law degree. You started the NAACP chapter at University of Cincinnati. You served on its board. You were actually the youngest president of the University of Cincinnati board. And you have a podcast called Disruption Now. And I wanted to talk to you, while we know each other and we do certain kinds of work together, I've not talked to you about race relations in America. And I'm interested in your thoughts and your perspective, and share them with all of us who are witnessing what is going on in the United States today. So opening thoughts, please.
Well, first of all, Bob, thank you for allowing me to come on your show. And, we've developed a friendship over the years, and I really appreciate your thoughtfulness. And, when we first met, I had no idea that you were a podcaster too. So we have that in common now. We're just kindred spirits a little bit here. So it's good to be here, and good to kind of share my thoughts here. In this country, we have a severe pandemic, and a lot of people can't see it. It allows you to be it's invisible to many. Most can shelter themselves from it, not feel its effects, not feel good about, I should say, but allow themselves to believe that it's something that's not real because it hasn't affected them. Therefore, it can't really exist. And maybe the people that are being infected by it, it's something with them. It's their underlying condition or their fault. I'm not talking about COVID-19. I'm talking about racism, which I believe is the real pandemic, particularly in the United States of America. So when I see this moment, it's encouraging from this point of view that people are focused on it. They're talking about it. But I want to give people a sense of really how bad this is, and have a thought, an exchange about how we really solve the issue. So I believe, Bob, and I think you appreciate this, I'm going to have another talk with the head of Crossroads. Actually, that's going to be literally after we're done. I'm going to talk to Brian Tome of Crossroads about this.
For those who don't know what that is, because we have some folks who are, so Crossroads is a large mega church. It's the mega church, I suppose, in Cincinnati, and Brian Tome is the senior pastor there?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct, he is. So, and we're talking to them because for the same reasons I want to talk to your audience too, and I'm glad you invited me, is the fact that, racism and how we view it is part of the issue. People are realizing that it's bad, but this is no worse than it's been. It's only because the light has been shined that people understand how bad it is. So I want to take from this moment an opportunity to grow, because I think people like to view themselves as good people, which is understandable. But I would think so. I think the first way to approach how to really solve this problem is particularly, and I'm talking to white people have to become more self-aware about race and racism. And the immediate reaction, there's generally several, but most of this, the reaction I get from folks, particularly those who may not be or have been as engaged or as aware or as racially conscious about how bad things are, they'll say, well, I'm not racist. Right. I'm a good person. Please don't hold that against me. Right. That is a natural human thing to do. It's not particular to white people. Right. However, I would say in this case, for us to solve it, we need more white people to become self-aware, because in order to allow evil or to do evil, people have to first convince themselves that they are good and the others are bad. Mm-hmm. And so I think about this story from Ta-Nehisi Coates. I forgot the name of the title of the book, but he mentions this one part of this story dealing with during the time of integration and during the middle of Jim Crow. It's a small white town in Pennsylvania, and they wrote a letter petitioning the government, and they started off with this, like, we are good Christian people, we follow the rules, we just don't want any of those black people in our neighborhood. Mm-hmm. They saw no disconnect in that statement, right? And I think collectively not much has changed. People generally say they view themselves as good people, to say this is not something I would ever do. And when they see something horrible like George Floyd and his life being taken away from him while the officer had a knee over him, it's hard, unless you're just an extreme racist and you have no sense of consciousness, it's hard for anybody that has any type of humanity in them to see that and not get offended. The bigger issue, Bob, is that those things happen because we allow an environment to continue over and over again by justifying that it's not our problem, I'm not racist, so I think self-awareness is the beginning of this.
Is your perception as well that the white community thinks that the black community is overreacting? Like, that it's, because if the white community is not seeing the systemic racism and don't think that they're bad, and all of a sudden they see marching in the streets, they're going, well, why is the black community so upset? This is the response is disproportional, where the black community say, no, what you're seeing is the pent-up frustration over many years and clearly lots of events. Only a few of them make the news. I mean, the reality is
only a few of them make a video.
Well, video, okay, yeah.
Even that, right? I mean, so few of them even make video, because what we're seeing now, racism is not worse than it has been. It's being filmed, as I think Will Smith said that. It's being exposed. Right. So we see it. The modern, cell phone is equivalent to, during the civil rights movement, what the news cameras were. It is the equivalent in power. It is shining the light. So back to your point, yes, often, I've had the conversations many times, white Americans, white people in general, because you don't experience, and I want to let you know, this is natural, right? This is the point that this is human nature. If you do not experience something directly in your mind, it doesn't exist. So you have to do work to see beyond, what's been presented in front of you. And so I think the first thing we got to do is have people get comfortable in challenging themselves. So there's a morality behind it, a spirituality, if you will, but then there's a science approach too. It is hard to change the mind and the patterns in the mind. So I want the listeners to know that when you think about this, you need to get your mind to a place where it's uncomfortable, because the natural shortcut, again, there's been plenty of books on this, Thinking Fast and Slow, actually written by Daniel Kahneman, won the Nobel Prize, talks about how the mind works, the shortcut. And so when people see racism, or they've seen it in the past, or even when they see the video, people find ways to say it must have been George Floyd's fault. You had to have done something wrong to make the police officer act that way. You must have done something. There's not something that allows people to say, some people, even when they see the tape, that this was just an inhumane act. So first step, acknowledge racism. I believe everybody's racist.
Right.
Controversial statement to some, but I think it's only controversial if you view racism from the extreme view of a person that goes and burns a cross on a lawn or goes and executes someone. That is an extreme violent act combined with maybe a racist feeling, but that's not how I define racism. I define racism as something that is a construct that's infected all of us and affects all of us in how we think and how we act, no matter who you are, even those who are sympathetic and want to be empathetic. It is a constant process. That's why I say self-improvement is the first thing. So when you hear language, when people talk about white privilege, if your immediate reaction is to be upset, natural reaction, next step you should take is to check yourself, because all we're saying in privilege is the fact that you can live a different existence. Bob, you probably don't have to have the conversation with your son that if you interact with police, do everything you can not to die. Right. That is a conversation I have to have with my son. My father had to have before me. His father, everybody else had to have that interaction. And so there is this, Bob, but you had a question. So
no, I was going to ask you when you said that was what your parents told you when you went out at night, when you were a teenager growing up, about how to behave.
Well, it's very clear, right? Make sure you always respect the officer, do everything you can to keep your hands on the steering wheel. Don't talk back to the officers. Doesn't matter if you're innocent or not. The goal is for you to live. That's the conversation we have. So that's the conversation we continue to have. And it's a different conversation. My white friends can have an argument with police officers,
right, exactly,
and come out okay and talk about their rights and everything else. And because of that, I want to get to your. I know you had a question, but I want to say this point. It's on my mind. You know, every single black man in America, the nicest black man you've ever met, have a smile on his face, corporate CEO, from those who are a construction worker, from those who've never been employed. All of us have the same feeling and interaction with law enforcement. And I would say all of us have what James Baldwin says. He said to be a black man and conscious in America is to always be enraged. All of us have that rage. And we've had to learn to deal with it and cope with it. And so I want people to know that we're not making this up. This is not something we made up. I've been pulled over many times because I'm an African American man and I drove a car that was nice at the time. I was put in the back of a police car as early as sixth grade because a store convenience owner called the police on me because he said I threatened his life. I didn't do anything close to that. Right. These things are real. They happen, and it's not something that white Americans, be they rich, poor, everywhere in between, have the privilege to not go through that. And what we need is to have an understanding that happens.
No, I mean, I don't know that when our son was growing up, and our son's a big guy, I didn't worry about him I worried about him doing something dumb, right? You tell your kids don't do stupid stuff, right? Because but I wasn't worried that he'd be stopped driving into our neighborhood just because he was driving into our neighborhood and it was 1 o'clock in the morning and he was out late with his friends. But I had, where we lived, I would imagine people who are African American, black young man driving down the street in a fancy car in our neighborhood could have gotten stopped as a police. Yeah. What's this kid doing here? This kid shouldn't be here.
Yep.
And that is an experience that I think I do want to say that none of us want to feel badly about ourselves. I mean, that's a natural feeling. We all want to look in the mirror and say, I'm a good guy. And so this notion of this systemic racism or the construct is, we grow up with understanding of who we are and the other, whoever the other is, and that, and race being what we're focused on absolutely right now, is profound, and we're seeing it. So this notion that black men are enraged because they've been seeing it for all this time, and white folks are going, we're oftentimes just becoming aware of it.
Yeah. And we're always, look, like, as I said, every black man in America, from myself to Barack Obama to the CEO of Merck, I think just talked about this. It is a common experience for every one of us. You can't escape it, no matter how much money you make, no matter your class. It's something we have to deal with and address. And I think so when people are thinking about this, they need to really understand that, okay, I have to challenge myself, because it's all of us. It's not just is not particular to white people. It's because of a majority minority thing. You don't have to go through it. And so it requires you to challenge yourself. Other things you can do, challenge your circle. When we talk about, gender discrimination and the Me Too movement, I had a conversation with some of my male colleagues because I didn't fully get it at first in terms of everything. Because I'm like, I feel like I'm being blamed for every single bad man in America. And I had this conversation with, one of my female friends, as he brought it to me, said, well, isn't that how white people view race? I said, you're right. It's the same thing. Just like men have to hold other men accountable to stop sexual harassment, to stop gender discrimination, to make sure women's voices are valued. Men have to do that because men, A, have the most power, and B, men are the best people positioned to hold other men accountable. They hear the conversations, they hear the rhetoric, they're there for the locker room talk, so on and so forth. They have the ability to talk to their sons, to their teenage boys, to tell them how to approach things. And I've been more intentional about doing that. And I think because of the movement, and I made sure to try to check my own biases there. It is the same thing for racism with white people. Look, white people are going to have to start checking other white people, and not just for the most violent acts. It's checking for their racist attitudes, for how they view people, making sure that to approach situations, would you view these things the same if they were people like yourselves? I'll give you another example. When I think about protesters and rioters, how people talk about the current folks who are protesting, and nobody's perfect across the board. We know there's been some things outside the bounds. That being said, there were also some things outside of the bounds with those who were protesters who were Make America Great Again folks, right? They were way outside the line. They were way outside taking AR-15s to protest. And somehow everybody can keep the peace, and they're considered good people and protesters. And then we can juxtapose that to how some people are talking about protesters now as being thugs and looters, and that we need to shoot them. It's just amazing when people can't see their own hypocrisy when these things have been right next to each other.
Right. No, we're seeing, and I think that in what you're describing, so the juxtaposition of how protests have played out. When there have been white protesters, they've been treated one way. When they're black protesters, they've been treated another way. Yeah. I think too, for us, many of the folks who participate in our experiences are Jewish, and the Jewish community also has a self perception, which is interesting, and of discrimination, but different. When I walk down the street, people don't see a Jewish guy, they see a white guy. But I may walk through certain neighborhoods and be worried about, if I'm identified as Jewish, what would happen if. I think it begs for the Jewish community to really think about the experiences we had in thinking about what the black community is going through right now.
Jewish folks have been traditionally have been our allies and still continue to be. And I would say when folks get comfortable and think that only applies to people of color, or they did something to put themselves in that situation, hate metastasizes. It doesn't stay in one area. It's not like, I'm just going to end here and hate black people. Generally, it starts bleeding over into other folks of color. It leads to anti-Semitism. This is why you have to, when hate stops, you got to cut it off at the head, because when it's empowered, it goes across the board. And we've seen a rise in hate crimes, not only to people of color. We've seen a rise in hate crimes to anti-Semitism. So a threat, injustice anywhere, as Dr. Martin Luther King said, is a threat to justice everywhere. So we are, whether we like it or not, we are tied together to make sure that we are fighting for justice. And that's the reason why people have to work hard to overcome racism. It is the same thing. It is a cousin of anti-Semitism, because all of it, when we get down to it, race is really nothing. Race is the false social construct to control people. This is what it is. And the same divisions people make when they try to go after Jewish people is the same divisions they make on race. And we have to try to work to end injustice. And that's why I think we're tied together.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's absolutely true that it's a different facet of the very same germ. And if you only think it's one piece of it, you're not dealing with the entire result. And we saw that in Charlottesville as they were protesting. It was anti-black, and they were shouting, "Jews won't replace us" at the same time.
Yeah.
It was conjoined. And so
they always are.
And
they always are. And I want to say that's why people have to be an advocate, Bob. So an advocate and being willing to risk some things in their social circle, it is worth that. We need folks to be not only say they're not racist, because to me that's not even useful. When people say they're colorblind or they're not racist, to me that's a defense mechanism to cut off the conversation, to protect themselves, to make themselves feel better. If I want to impress upon anything, is to fight that urge, and we have to do that because. Again, it's also in our self-interest. Not that everything should be in our self-interest, but when you're particularly talking about Jewish folks who are always in some ways seen in the minority,
right?
It is in our interest to fight against hate because eventually that metastasizes and that virus comes. And so back to my earlier metaphor about being able to social distance yourself. Don't social distance yourself from racism. Even when this moment passes, it goes on every single day. You have thoughts about it. You have to work to capture those thoughts. You have to work to challenge other people in your circle, even when it's not comfortable. And what I appreciate about this moment, Bob, is that it's making people uncomfortable where they have to address it. They have to deal with it. They have to see it. And my hope is that after this moment, when the world is not shining a light, you seek to see it because it still exists. It will still exist. And it's an evil we're going to have to continually work towards abolishing.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's it. When it ends, when we think it ends, it's not over. We have to really keep on focusing on it. And you keep on talking about it. I know you're talking about it in your podcast quite a bit, I think.
Yeah, I talk about it all the time. We talk, the focus of Disruption Now is all about, Disruption Now is about disrupting common narratives and constructs that we have that we hold on to, and we all have them and we all hold on to them, whether we believe so or not. African Americans are actually sometimes worse perpetuators of racism against other African Americans than the majority population, because when something is so ingrained, people believe it. And so you have to work day in and day out to prevent that from happening. And then you can be advocates too. There are things that can be done tangibly, right? We have set up some systems here in the United States of America that can be and should be dismantled. Mass incarceration is something that we have chosen to do. We have chosen to police other communities, particularly Black, and I want to say brown because Latinos are going through a lot of this too. Latinos I will put them in there. Like one of my best friends is married to a Latina, and her brother was unjustifiably killed by police about 20 years ago. And so it's a story that it happens a lot, but it's just not just police. It is a system that says it's okay to not view certain people as humans or view them less than. So it's okay to over prosecute them. It's okay to put almost a third of every Black man is in jail. A lot of those are not for violent crimes. They are for drugs. And now if you look at how people are viewing drugs in the opioid crisis, they have a very different approach than the 1990s. It's all about treatment. And before it was about locking everybody away and asking no questions. And that effect has caused us lots of money, draining opportunities. So we need to have an approach of, you can be out there on the front lines. We need more white people in general to go out there and be willing to be advocates on the front line, because it's not enough for us to do it because we're not always believed.
Well, I really appreciate taking the time and sharing this with this painful moment that you're sharing your thoughts, your wisdom, your experience, and talking to us about how we can be advocates and our responsibilities. So my commitment to you is we're going to keep on having this conversation.
Yeah, I'm going to have you on my show too, by the way. I want to have you on to talk through it.
Good. I think that's really important. I think we want to open up these dialogues and continue that. And each of us who are participating, wherever we live in the world, we have to take a look and turn our vision inward. And as Rob said, we turn our vision inward even when it's uncomfortable. And then we have to ask ourselves why. And then we have to work on ourselves. It's not enough to say, oh, I don't see race. It's about, how do I see race? How do I understand these constructs? How am I a participant? And I believe everyone's a leader somewhere in their lives. We lead at very different times, as Rob talked about. Each of us needs to speak up. That's what we need to do. So Rob, thanks so much. Be safe.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate you. Go out there and keep disrupting.
Take care. You too.
Thanks, Bob.
Bye-bye. The conversation I had with Rob challenges all of us to think about our own prejudices, our own biases. I hope that this is the first of many conversations I will have with him that I will share with you as we continue this journey, as we work to better our nation, as we work to better ourselves. At this moment, we come together to welcome the Sabbath. We take pause, breathe in life, and reflect on the importance of each of our lives. We feel the touch of the spirit on the body, the warmth of fellow human beings. We embrace our uniqueness, our diversity, our capacity to change, to explore, to change our world. I invite you to share a virtual challah, for in the sharing of the challah, this Sabbath bread, we nourish our spirit, we are connected with each other and with our ancestors. Baruch Hamalkapeinu, blessed is the work of our hands. Baruch Hazon Ha'adam, blessed is the vision of our minds. Baruch Lechem Ha'aretz, blessed is the bread of the earth. And if you have some wine or juice, please join with me. Life is a wondrous gift. The mind observes with awe and appreciation flows from the heart. Life's joyful bounties are unveiled. Just treasures abound in ordinary moments. A familiar face, the simplicity of a smile, tender kisses, the warmth and security of a hug, enchanting melodies, the grace of dance, the coolness of sculpted marble, a remarkable story, the complexity of atomic structure, thunder's reverberation, the shimmering of the rainbow, intoxicating rose petals. These moments become opportunities to affirm that which is good. As we lift the cup, a tribute to life's enchantments, may we find joy and contentment in our human endeavors. Ruchim chachayim ba'olam, blessed is the life within the world. Ruchim chachayim ba'adam, blessed is the life within each person. And we say, l'chaim, to life. I'm glad you could join me for this Shabbat. I hope perhaps that you'll share this service with others, particularly this service and the conversation that Rob Richardson and I had about racism in America. It's an important conversation. We all need to hear it and wrestle with it. So please share it with others. Also, if you come to bethadam.org, you can listen to my podcast. My most recent one is about racism in America. We all need to grapple with this stain on our nation. I'm glad you can join with me. I'm glad we could pause. I'm glad we could think. I'm glad we could reflect on our values. And we end with the words that we end with each week. May we know blessings those who are near. May we know blessings those who are far. And may this Sabbath bring its goodness to everyone soon, wherever they are. Shabbat Shalom.